How are you left feeling, Damien, after those 18 turbulent days that have seen so much for this new Prime Minister?
Well, it's an extraordinary mix of external events. Most obviously the sad death of the Queen, and events that the Prime Minister has wanted to generate. She said that she wanted a radical new approach. And she knows that there's probably 2 years to go before the next general election. So if things are going to happen, they have to happen quickly. And so she's done what she said she was going to do. And I agree with you. And it's obvious, isn't it, that, as you say, that budget was both a lot more than a mini budget and also divides opinion. But I think the preponderant view on the Conservative backbenches is that, well, she's doing what she said she was going to do. So, let's give it a chance. Let's see if it works. Let's hope it works.
Interesting point, because I was saying earlier on to one of the other guests is, hey, here's a politician who, lo and behold, does what she says she was going to do. Shock horror. And that's to be embraced. But there's a tricky point within this, Damien, as well, and reminding folk listening to our conversation that actually you and I first met when you were a financial journalist, so you know about that stuff, how the economy works and how it's supposed to work. It's one thing for Liz to say, I'm going to reject the Treasury orthodoxy. Another when she rejects part of the Tory orthodoxy. And there are real grave concerns within your party about unfunded tax cuts, about not worrying too much about borrowing because it will lead to growth, and not worrying too much about the fact that the pound is heading for parity with the dollar. In a sense, that's a much bigger gamble for her than throwing the book out of the window that says Treasury orthodoxy.
Yes, I think that's right. That you can, if you like, you can successfully take on the Treasury if you're determined enough as a Prime Minister and a Chancellor, but taking on the bond markets is more difficult. It was Bill Clinton's advisor, Jim Carville, who famously said that if reincarnation happens, he wants to come back as the bond market, because they are the people who can really run things. And the jury is out, frankly. I mean, the initial reaction of the pound, as you say, went down, but markets can change their minds very quickly. So we'll see what happens in the months ahead. I think more significant may be that the Bank of England may feel forced to put interest rates up, partly for fear of inflation, but also to try and protect the pound. And that in itself will obviously have an effect on people with variable rate mortgages, who may therefore find the amount they're benefiting from the tax cuts to be cancelled out by the rise in their mortgage payments. So that's something to look out for, certainly.
Yeah, fascinating. In fact, your colleague Mark O'Longhi was on the programme in the first hour, and he said he broadly welcomed the budget across the spectrum, but he was genuinely fearful of what was happening on the interest rate front. There's a story in a couple of the papers that there are so many of you, Conservative members of Parliament, who are fearful that you might even abstain on some of these measures if the pound hit parity with the dollar. Is that just the wrong people talking to the wrong people, or is that a real worry?
I don't think that's a worry. I think I'd be surprised if any of my colleagues voted against tax cuts, for example. That would seem a very strange thing for a Conservative to do. I think that some of the most positive stuff is the deregulatory agenda that accompanies the tax cuts. But that's where I think there might be individual issues. Some of it I completely welcome and publicly welcome some of it that happened on Friday, but I want to preserve environmental protections. I want to preserve our landscape, and I think that the detail of what the deregulation is in areas like investment zones is going to be, it's absolutely vital to get that right, so that we can get the economic benefits from the Chancellor's proposals without having wider societal difficulties with it.
A very, very important point, although I don't think you uttered the word, I'll utter it for you. Fracking. I mean, Liz did say during her election campaign that she was in favour of lifting the ban on fracking, but with the caveat only if local people agreed to it. Many critics said, you can't do that. Get real, get tough. But she has retained that. I presume you and colleagues will be watching very closely to make sure that that remains the case.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my colleagues who might have fracking in their areas are absolutely determined that, to find out what local consent means, it's got to mean something realistic. And more widely, I think on the investment zones, clearly there will be some restrictions lifted. I think if that involved taking away large amounts of green land that people value, then that would run into opposition as well. So, it is possible to pursue a successful deregulatory agenda, but it needs to be done with sensitivity, and the details of each of these individual policies will be extremely important to get right.
Yeah, as all of our emails have shown, and most of our guests have reflected, there is another area of deep sensitivity for people out there listening to us, Damian, and that is the notion of more help for the rich and less for the poor. Digby Jones, another old mate of mine, said on this programme yesterday, while the city and financial services are utterly vital to the UK economy, uncapping bankers' bonuses just look like poor politics. That's Digby Jones.
Yeah, I slightly subscribe to the view that the Chancellor expressed, that all that's happened over the past few years has been that bankers are still extremely well paid. They just stick it all on their base salary rather than on their bonus. And frankly, if they're going to get very highly paid, at least let's have them successfully earning bonuses rather than just demanding extra pay. So I think the bankers' bonus row will be a sort of Westminster row. I think much more important is for everyone across the board to feel some kind of benefit from these tax cuts. People in the end care about what's happening to their own family budget more than they care about what's happening to somebody in the City of London.
Fascinating. That very optimistic view, Damian. I'd love to talk about that again a little longer, but I've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to cut to the chase on my final two questions. Liz inherited a lot of party divisions following Boris Johnson's defenestration, but also that genuine leadership contest between opinion on the left, opinion on the right, and it was quite a refreshing debate. Is she up to healing the wounds and reuniting your party?
She's certainly trying very hard. We were all invited to a series of meetings at Number 10 or at Central Office over the week where the strategy was explained. And I think the general spirit, I didn't vote for Liz. I supported Tom Tugendhat in the early rounds of the contest and then voted for Rishi, but she won. And as a Democrat, you have to say, not only, as we've said, did she win, but she's now doing what she said she was going to do. So fair enough. She's got to be given the space to do that.
And my final question is, it's clearly well briefed, and whether it's Kwasi Kwarteng's people or Number 10, I don't know. But you ain't seen nothing yet. There's a whole tranche of other matters to come in another budget, either this year or perhaps at some juncture next year. Are there one or two Damian Green warning points that you would whisper in his ear to say, given what you did on Friday, here's what you need to be cautious about if you're going to have another bite of the cherry?
I think it would all fall under the heading of there's more to politics than the economy. There's more to conservatism than tax cutting. And actually preserving our landscape, preserving our institutions, doing reform in a way that cuts with the grain of British society is extremely important. So whenever you propose a deregulatory measure, have a thought as to what this might mean in the long run, what this might mean to things that people, and obviously particularly if you like conservative supporting people or people inclined to support conservatives, really think and care about. And that will include our national institutions, and it will certainly include the British countryside and environment. So that would be my sort of have a care note to the Chancellor and indeed the government more widely.